Hey, my last video was some tips that I got value out of when it comes to tearing your car down before working on the project. So if you want to check that out, click the link above. Today's video will be a couple of tips that worked for me when it comes to stripping the paint off the car. Why would we want to strip the paint off the car? Well, I revert you back to an earlier video of mine before starting a project. Especially tip number one is, what is your goal? Now, if you're doing a full restoration or a paint job, or even metal work and rust repair, stripping all the paint off to bare metal is probably going to be the most ideal scenario for you. Tip number one, choose your method. So since we are dealing with more home garage builds, maybe your resources are limited, by far the best way is to send your car out to get media blasted, or you can even do it yourself. I've seen a lot of people make makeshift booths and using cheap Harbor Freight sandblasting machines, so it can be done. Yeah, that's the best way, but there's also other ways that are cheaper, use more elbow grease and takes a lot of time, and that is using sanding pads, chemical stripper, or even those stripper discs, which are quite nice. Tip number two is safety gear. Once again, this is a no-brainer. All the methods that I just spoke about are bad for your lungs, bad for your eyes, bad for your ears, bad for your skin, so yeah, look after yourself. Tip number three is protect your surrounds. Now, this is especially true for chemical strippers. Don't be afraid to lay a drop sheet on the ground. It'll make cleanup much easier. Also, tape off, chrome and body molds and stuff like that you don't want the stripper getting onto, because it could cause some irreversible damage on those parts. Tip number four is least aggressive method first. So sure, 24 grit on a flapper disc is going to make short work of removing that paint, but it also will damage the metal, and that's going to be pretty hard to fix later on. It could even be irreversible. Always start with the least aggressive method first. That way you can step to more aggressive methods. You'll save yourself from heartache. Tip number five is keep the area cool. With sanding discs and stripper discs and all that sort of stuff, it can generate a lot of heat into the metal, and you don't want to go warping the metal, because that's going to make your life much harder when it comes to metal finishing the job and before applying your primers and fillers. So tip number six is neutralize chemicals. Once again, especially apparent for paint strippers, the corrosive elements inside the paint stripper, if you don't neutralize it, it can be working in the background after you've painted your car and everything, and then issues can arise later on. So I know when I first started, I was a bit of a cowboy when it came to paint strippers. I just applied the product and wiped it off, and then just went straight on with my primers and whatever the case may be, and touch wood, nothing has happened since or yet. So just read the tech data sheet of whatever product you're using and pretty much follow it to the T. Tip number seven is vacuum and clean. Now, you've just spent the last few days or even weeks sanding down that car, or you sent it to a media blaster and it came back to you all ready to go. Now, you're going to want to be paying attention and vacuuming every single nook and cranny and blowing out every single crevice of that car, because the last thing you want to do is when you go to put your final paint on or even primer, you don't want the spray gun to push that dust and debris up into the air and land on your fresh paint. That's not going to be good for anybody, and it'll definitely ruin your day. Tip number eight is cover the bare steel. So you've just spent money getting it media blasted, or you've just spent time in sanding down the car, or you've been wearing masks for weeks using paint stripper. The last thing you want to do is leave that metal uncovered, because the metal is going to flash rust, and then you're going to be spending your time again sanding all that flash rust off. A few different products you can use. You can use a chemical cleaner or rust converter. I think deoxidine is one of the trade names for it. That will leave your metal in a sort of clean blue blue state, and it'll actually preserve the middle for a while. Or you can use the 2-pack epoxy primer, or even in a pinch use single pack etch primer. That'll get the job done if you live in a fairly dry climate. So there we have it. Those are some tips that I found valuable when it came to stripping the paint off the car. Comment what sort of procedure you would do on your project or you have been doing. I personally like those strip it discs. I think they do a great job and they leave the middle nice and clean, but I've also had some good success, especially if it's intricate areas like rocket covers and stuff like that with paint stripper. So whatever works, I guess. Thanks very much for checking out this video. Cheers. See ya.